99.9% proof Putin believes Ethiopian Bible destroys America's Christian core. What if one ancient book could shatter everything Americans were taught about Christianity? What if, beneath the polished pulpits, the marble monuments, and the patriotic hymns that bind God to the flag, there lay a buried secret so dangerous it could destabilize the very narrative of the nation's soul? Imagine the shock of hearing it not from the soft-spoken theologian, nor the skeptical professor, but from the lips of a figure long cast as America's adversary, a voice beyond the Western gates declaring that the Ethiopian Bible carries 99.9% proof that the foundations of American Christianity rest not on bedrock, but on sand. This is not merely a geopolitical insult, it is a philosophical detonation. For when the stranger points to your sacred text and claims it unmasks your house of faith as a house of lies, the wound strikes deeper than war. It pierces identity, memory, and destiny itself. If this revelation shakes you, stay with us. Subscribe, share your thoughts in the comments, and join the conversation. Your voice matters in uncovering truths that institutions would rather keep hidden. Putin reveals the Bible America hid from its own people. There is no sting sharper than the accusation of concealment. To say that America has hidden a Bible from its own people is not simply to suggest censorship. It is to suggest betrayal, an act not of omission but of deliberate silence, a silence so heavy that it echoes through the very foundations of a nation built on the proclamation of truth. The archetype of Putin in this philosophical drama does not emerge as a theologian carefully sifting through manuscripts, nor as a prophet tenderly guiding the lost sheep, but as a cynic, a cold outsider with the audacity to speak aloud what Americans themselves fear to utter. He is an iron mask in a theater of empire, lifting his voice not to teach but to accuse, pointing to the uncomfortable possibility that the Western canon of Christianity, the version enshrined in pulpits, hymns, and presidential prayers, has been curated, edited, and sanitized for the sake of order, not truth. The Ethiopian Bible, older than the King James, older than the Catholic compilations that once ruled Europe, whispers like an uninvited ghost at the American banquet of faith. It carries within its pages lost books, forgotten prophets, stories that trouble the smooth surface of Western certainty. And herein lies the scandal. It does not merely add to the Christian tradition, it destabilizes it. It suggests that what Americans were told was the Bible may in fact be only a version, a selection, a political anthology passed down through centuries of empire and reform, while deeper, stranger, more disruptive voices were exiled into silence. Why then would America, the self-declared land of liberty, the nation that boasts of freedom of speech, freedom of conscience, freedom of worship, bury such a book? Why would a republic that prides itself on the open marketplace of ideas suppress a scripture that dares to tell the story differently? Because revelation, true revelation, is not safe. Revelation unsettles power. Revelation ignites questions that cannot be extinguished with Sunday sermons or patriotic pageantry. A scripture that speaks outside the approved canon does not simply add, it threatens to undo. It rips apart the seamless cloth of certainty and exposes the seams of human hands that stitched it together. The Ethiopian scriptures in this imagined revelation become more than ancient ink. They become fire. If they tell a story divergent from Rome's, if they preserve voices that Western tradition silenced, then America's theological empire, its megachurches built like shopping malls, its televangelists beaming prosperity gospel into suburban living rooms, its politicians draping themselves in biblical rhetoric, rests not on unshakable truth, but on selective amnesia. The faith that proclaims itself as eternal may in fact be built on careful forgetting. The outsider's accusation, to American ears, sounds theatrical, but therein lies its power. The genius of the charge is not in its scholarly accuracy, but in its dramatic force. It dares to claim that America's greatest concealment is not a classified CIA file, not a Pentagon report, but a sacred text, a hidden Bible, a revelation that was not rejected because it was false, but because it was too true, too wish. too inconvenient, too destabilizing. This is the philosophical dagger, the recognition that a free people are never truly free if the story of their faith has been curated by omission, edited to preserve the empire of belief rather than the wilderness of truth. The emotional wound this accusation inflicts on the American imagination is profound. For Americans, Christianity has never been merely personal piety. It has been national mythology. The Bible has not only been a book for the soul, but a banner for the nation. It has marched with soldiers into war. It has been quoted in inaugural addresses. It has been etched into the marble of courthouses and whispered in the swearing-in of presidents. To suggest that America has concealed another Bible, one that could contradict, destabilize, or even overthrow the Americanized version of Christianity, is to suggest that the nation's very mythology is counterfeit. And what is a nation without its myth? What is America without the belief that its destiny is divinely inscribed? The Ethiopian Bible in this telling does not arrive as a scholarly curiosity, but as a bombshell, a mirror in which America sees its reflection not as the chosen guardian of truth, but as the manipulator of it. The outsider archetype, the figure of Putin in this narrative, need not even prove the claim in detail. It is enough to raise the specter, to hold up the ancient manuscript and say, well, this is what you feared. This is what you buried. The accusation stings not because Americans believe the outsider, but because part of them already suspects the fragility of their foundations. The language of betrayal courses through this wound like poison. To be betrayed by politicians is expected. To be betrayed by corporations is familiar. But to be betrayed by faith, to discover that the version of the sacred text handed down was not the whole truth, is to discover that the betrayal is not merely institutional, but existential. It means that even one's prayers, one's hymns, one's whispered hopes in the dark night of suffering may have been shaped by omissions designed not to serve the soul, but to serve power. And so the outsider's claim, however theatrical, however strategic, however cynical, becomes a philosophical parable for America. It forces the nation to confront the possibility that what it most fears is not foreign invasion, nor economic collapse, nor political scandal, but the shattering of its sacred myth. For nations do not live by bread alone, nor even by armies and wealth, they live by story. And if the story of America's Christian core is revealed as incomplete, manipulated, or false, then America is not who it thought it was. The Ethiopian Bible becomes, in this philosophical imagination, the forbidden book, the one text that could unmask the illusion, the one mirror that reflects the empire's nakedness. And America, in its silence, becomes the jailer of revelation, locking away the inconvenient truth to preserve the comfort of conformity. The irony is almost unbearable. The nation that preaches freedom of religion may itself have shackled the most dangerous scripture. Herein lies the final philosophical twist. Concealment is never permanent. To hide a text is not to erase it. To bury a truth is not to kill it. Like seeds pressed into the dark soil, revelations bloom in their own time. The outsider's accusation, Putin, as archetype, as iron mask of cynicism, becomes less a claim about Ethiopia and more a prophecy about America. That sooner or later, the truths America hides from itself will come roaring back, demanding to be reckoned with. And when that reckoning comes, it will not be gentle. It will not be polite. It will feel like betrayal. It will taste like ashes. And it will shake not just faith, but the very identity of the nation that dared to call itself chosen. 99.9% proof Putin points to Western Christianity built on lies. The number 99.9% is itself a weapon. It carries the aura of science, certainty, mathematical inevitability, and in the hands of an outsider who thrives on spectacle, it becomes a blade pointed at the heart of America's sacred identity. The archetype of Putin in this philosophical drama does not merely claim, he quantifies. He holds up the Ethiopian Bible like a courtroom exhibit, a piece of damning evidence against centuries of Western theology, and he declares with cold precision that Western Christianity, draped in the robes of tradition and the authority of centuries, is exposed as fraudulent with near-perfect confidence. And here America is caught not in a debate but in a trial, its faith cross-examined, its mythology challenged, Its conscience weighed on the scales of truth. But what is the lie that this 99.9% proof seeks to uncover? It is not that Christ lived, nor that faith comforts, nor even that the human longing for transcendence is real. No, the lie is subtler, more insidious, more devastating, that the West alone holds the definitive version of truth, that Rome and its heirs sealed once and for all the canon of Christianity, that America with its megachurches and its star-spangled sermons is the rightful custodian of God's eternal revelation. The lie is that the Christ America worships the blonde, blue-eyed figure who blesses the rifles of soldiers, who endorses the policies of presidents, who waves the flag in one hand and the Bible in the other, is the Christ of all humanity. The Ethiopian text cracks this illusion like glass under strain. It whispers of a Christianity older, stranger, darker, more Eastern, more African than America dares to confess. It carries the weight of a tradition that does not fit neatly into the Western imagination, that cannot be reduced to suburban family values, that cannot be co-opted by politicians as an ornament for speeches. It dares to remind the world that Christianity was not born in Washington, nor in Rome, but in a world of deserts and mountains, of tongues and tribes that America seldom acknowledges. And this reminder is not simply inconvenient, it is shattering. For America has built an empire not only of armies and markets, but of myth. And at the core of that myth is the belief that its faith is universal, that its story is destiny, that its version of Christianity is the final word. Here lies the philosophical punch. A lie repeated for centuries does not become truth, it becomes architecture. It is built into the walls of churches, the structures of seminaries, the rhetoric of politics, the laws of nations. It becomes so ordinary, so natural, that it ceases to appear as a lie at all, and instead appears as the very air one breathes. And when such a lie is exposed, the danger is not merely theological, but structural, existential. To tear down the lie is not simply to question Sunday school lessons. It is to destabilize the entire American order that depends upon its sanctity. The outsider archetype, cynical though he may be, dares to utter what America cannot bear to whisper, that its Christianity is not divine revelation, not eternal truth, but political design. It is a faith sculpted by empire, by convenience, by power. And the Ethiopian Bible becomes the mirror that reflects this uncomfortable truth, showing America not the radiant face of eternity, but a visage painted with the brushstrokes of empire. To imagine this claim as spectacle is one thing. To feel its weight is another. For Americans, Christianity is not just belief, it is identity, history, inheritance, destiny. It is the myth by which wars were justified, by which presidents were inaugurated, by which laws were blessed. If the myth is revealed as fabrication, then the house is not simply cracked, it is hollow. The horror lies in the possibility that what millions believed to be revelation was in fact a construction, a narrative carefully crafted to align heaven with empire, God with government, eternity with America. And herein lies the drama. The accusation of fraud is not external but internal, for Americans themselves sense the cracks. The younger generations drifting from the church, the scandals of corruption and hypocrisy, the emptiness behind prosperity gospels and culture wars, all these testify to a foundation less divine than political. The outsider's accusation does not invent the fracture, it magnifies it. The number 99.9% reappears here with chilling resonance. It suggests inevitability, the kind of certainty that leaves no room for doubt, no space for negotiation. It is not a whisper of possibility, but a hammer of proof. And for an American audience accustomed to treating faith as sacred beyond evidence, such quantification is unbearable. Faith resists measurement, yet here it is weighed and found wanting. In the philosophy of power, numbers are not neutral, they are weapons. They claim authority, they silence opposition, they create the illusion of inevitability. When the outsider archetype declares 99.9% proof of fraud, he does not only attack theology, he destabilizes America's sense of moral superiority, its assurance of chosenness, its myth of exceptionalism. The Ethiopian Bible in this unfolding parable is not merely another text. It is the forbidden archive, the hidden testimony that America fears to confront. Its existence alone raises questions that cannot be contained. What other truths have been concealed? What voices silenced? What stories erased? The power of the accusation lies not in the details, but in the imagination it sparks. Americans need not read a single verse of the Ethiopian text to feel the tremor of doubt. It is enough to know that another version exists, older, stranger, unassimilated. The very existence of an alternative canon undermines the West's claim to universality. It whispers that America's Bible is not the Bible but a Bible, and that difference alone is dynamite. The philosophical wound is deep. If America's Christianity is political design, then its moral authority is compromised, its sense of destiny exposed as illusion. For centuries, America has proclaimed itself a nation under God, a city upon a hill, a beacon of truth. But if its truth is constructed, curated, even fabricated, then it is not a beacon, but a stage set, a facade. The outsider's accusation thus becomes not only a theological critique, but an existential threat. To unmask the lie is to strip away the illusion of chosenness, to reveal America as one empire among many, fragile, transient, no more sacred than Rome or Babylon. And so we return to the number, 99.9%. It lingers like a drumbeat, a verdict, a prophecy. It is the outsider's way of saying, your myth is exposed, your house built on sand, your truth no longer untouchable. America may resist, may deny, may dismiss the accusation as propaganda, but the seed is planted. Once the possibility of fraud is spoken, it cannot be unsaid. The Ethiopian Bible becomes a mirror held to America's face, and in that mirror, the reflection is not eternity, but empire, not holiness, but history, not revelation, but construction. And for a nation that has built its identity on the illusion of divine certainty, there is no accusation more devastating, no revelation more unbearable, than to be told with 99.9% certainty that the truth it guards so proudly is not truth at all, but a carefully maintained lie. Putin reveals America's Christian core is already crumbling. A house of lies does not collapse in silence. It groans, it cracks, it shudders long before the final fall. The archetype of Putin, ever eager to dramatize American weakness, insists that the collapse has already begun. Faith, he suggests, is no longer a flame in the American soul, but a branding iron in its politics. Church attendance declines. Scandals erupt. Hypocrisy bleeds from pulpits into headlines. The very core once thought unshakable is riddled with fractures. And here is the wound that cannot be ignored. The fracture is not foreign-made, not planted by enemies, but born from within, growing silently like rot beneath a polished surface, invisible until the structure begins to buckle. The philosophical weight of this claim is profound, for what collapses is not merely belief but identity. For America, Christianity has never been just religion, it has been mythology, the sacred glue binding nationhood to providence. The whispered assurance that history itself bends toward the American story because God wills it so. To say that this core is crumbling is not to predict a theological squabble, but an existential unraveling. Without the belief that God himself smiles upon the American project, what remains? Just another empire, naked, bereft of divine sanction, stumbling like Rome before its fall. The outsider's words sting not because they are wholly alien, but because they echo the whispers already present within. Many Americans already sense the erosion. They see pews emptying. They feel the fatigue of hollow promises. They carry the cynicism that festers when preachers speak of holiness, but fall in scandal. When politicians wield scripture like a weapon, but discard its ethics the moment power is at stake. The rise of the nones, those who claim no religious affiliation, the swelling disillusionment with organized faith, the restless hunger for authenticity, all these signal a people weary of performance and thirsty for truth. And so the accusation does not plant the rot, It merely names it. To reveal a crumbling core is not to curse America, but to describe the destiny of any nation that mistakes political religion for eternal truth. It is the paradox of empire. The stronger it declares itself, the weaker its foundations become, because the louder the myth is shouted, the more fragile it proves when silence descends. The archetype of Putin thus becomes a mirror, unwelcome yet unavoidable, reflecting not only what America denies, but what America already knows. Faith in America has too often been stripped of mystery, turned into slogans, monetized by televangelists, politicized by campaign strategists, and paraded as proof of national chosenness. What was once a fire of spiritual yearning has been transfigured into a tool of empire, a justification for wars abroad, a shield against criticism at home, a ritual blessing for wealth and dominance. But fires cannot be forged into iron without losing their essence, and so faith, when hardened into branding, ceases to inspire. It burns. The core, once alive with transcendence, now smolders with resentment and hypocrisy, and no nation, however powerful, can sustain itself on ashes. The philosophical truth is brutal. A myth can animate a people only so long as it is believed. Once doubt infects it, once cracks are visible, collapse is inevitable. The outsider's words sting because they strip away the pretense of permanence. They remind America that no empire, however cloaked in sanctity, escapes the destiny of decay. Rome fell not because its legions grew weak, but because its gods grew unbelievable. The same fate threatens America when its God becomes a mask for politics rather than a mystery for the soul. What remains then is the unbearable question. Who are we when the myth dies? If America can no longer say with certainty that it is chosen, blessed, exceptional, if it must admit that its Christian core was as much construction as revelation, then what identity remains? Perhaps just another empire wandering in history's ruins, remembered not for providence but for pride. Yet in this devastation lies the possibility of rebirth. Though it is a possibility America resists with every fiber of its being. To admit the collapse is to embrace humility, to relinquish the myth of exceptionalism, to recognize that truth cannot be contained by political religion. But until that humility comes, until the nation faces the hollowing of its soul, the cracks will widen, the fractures deepen, and the collapse accelerate. And when the house finally falls, it will not be because of an outsider's curse, but because it was built on illusions too fragile to withstand the weight of reality. The Shockwave. Why Putin says Ethiopia holds the key to truth. And so the final blow lands. Ethiopia, a name that to many American ears conjures little more than famine images in dusty history books or a vague geography lesson long forgotten, now suddenly exalted as the guardian of Christianity's original pulse. It is the reversal no one saw coming. The humiliation of empire when its gaze shifts and realizes the truth it thought it had locked away in Rome, sanctified in Washington, and paraded through stained glass cathedrals is not its possession at all, but belongs to the margins it ignored. The outsider archetype, cunning in his performance, points not westward to the marble halls of Europe, nor northward to the monuments of America, but eastward and southward, to the highlands of Africa where faith was not yet polished into an imperial tool, not yet tamed by councils and kings, but burned raw as devotion, untamed and fierce. To suggest that Ethiopia holds the key to truth is to declare that America's vault of religious authority, its treasury of sermons, hymns, and theological systems, is counterfeit. It is to call the entire edifice of Western Christianity a copy, a counterfeit stamped with imperial wax, while the original sits overlooked, ignored, breathing still in a land America never thought to revere. This is not merely theological, it is geopolitical theater. For Ethiopia in this drama is no longer a forgotten nation on the map. It becomes symbol, the underdog custodian of authenticity, the quiet keeper of the flame. And America, with all its noise and spectacle, becomes the hypocrite empire, afraid of exposure, desperate to keep its myth intact. The shockwave lies not in the Ethiopian texts alone, but in the humiliation of reversal. That the West, so accustomed to exporting truth like a commodity, must now face the accusation that it has been importing lies, draping them in sanctity, and demanding the world bow before them. This reversal destabilizes the American psyche because it undermines the story America tells about itself, that it is chosen, that it is guardian of truth, that its God is the God of history. To be told that truth resides elsewhere, that God's original testament beats in the heart of Ethiopia, is to hear that America is not chosen but deceived, not guardian but usurper. Philosophically, this revelation is not just a critique of religion, it is a confrontation with humility. For centuries, America has believed that truth wears the robes of empire. That revelation belongs to the powerful, that God's blessing is tied to strength, wealth, and victory. Yet here, in this outsider's claim, is the scandal. Truth may not wear robes at all. Truth may not sit in Washington or Rome. Truth may not adorn itself with empire's symbols. Truth may live instead in the margins, among the forgotten, among those whom the world dismisses as weak, poor, irrelevant. It may burn in Ethiopia's mountains, where voices long silenced by Western arrogance whisper still of a faith unbroken, unassimilated. And this possibility terrifies America, because what it fears most is not Ethiopia's scripture itself, it is the mirror Ethiopia holds. In that mirror, America sees its God not as eternal Father, not as the transcendent ground of being, but as political invention, a deity draped in stars and stripes, a Christ repurposed as cultural mascot, a faith remade as empire's justification. The mirror does not lie, it reveals. And revelation, once glimpsed, cannot be unseen. And so the essay closes with the tremor of the outsider's voice reverberating, echoing like thunder across the landscape of America's fragile mythology, 99.9% proof, not because of Ethiopia alone, not because of manuscripts and textual variants, but because the cracks in America's own soul testify to it. The revelation is not in parchment and ink, not in ancient scrolls, but in the tremor itself, the way America flinches when its faith is questioned, the way its leaders bristle when sacred myths are unveiled as tools of power, the way its people sense deep down that their religion has been harnessed not to liberate but to control. The power of the accusation is that it names what is already felt, that the fire of faith has cooled to ash, that the myth of divine destiny is fraying, that the empire has mistaken itself for eternity. For what destroys a core is never the blow from without, but the hollowness within. Empires do not collapse because enemies curse them. They collapse because the story that once held them together no longer inspires, no longer convinces, no longer binds. America may point fingers outward, may blame the outsider for blasphemy, propaganda, or hostility, but the truth is more terrifying. The weakness lies not in Ethiopia's revelation, but in America's own emptiness. When the outsider declares Ethiopia the key, he is not handing the world a new scripture. He is exposing that America has lost its own. The hollowness was there all along, masked by sermons, disguised by monuments, hidden behind the facade of certainty. The outsider merely held up the mirror. In America, staring into it cannot look away.